other side, and leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But Jesus was in the stern, asleep on the cushion, and they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind, and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?" The Gospel of Christ.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
A child listens to his parents explain that one of them is going away, that this big change in his life will never change how much he is loved by both. He will feel many things and they will need to work them out. His heart is aching, but he tries to hear what they are saying, to trust them. A boat, overcrowded with fishermen from Galilee, set out for the other side of the lake. The boat has been a platform for Jesus to preach and teach to the pressing crowds along the shoreline. But now the boat is tossing and turning in the growing storm, and they cannot control the boat, and the men are bailing the water and turning the sails. Yet still, water is quickly filling the boat, where Jesus, exhausted, rests, fast asleep. One young youth, a shepherd boy named David, studies intensely the face of the giant armor-clad Goliath towering over him, whom he has willingly offered to do battle with, that his people, the Israelites, might be spared battle with the Philistines. David knows that no contender has survived this combat, but David is not thinking that Goliath is too big to fight, but rather Goliath is too big to miss. And with God's hand upon his home, his slingshot will aim swift and true, and in that moment he charges Goliath. So what do all these scenes have in common? What links these separate lives and situations and times? It is courage. In every instance, what is demonstrated is courage. Courage to respond to a very difficult situation and to find strength to act with love and goodness in the face of fear, danger, pain, and difficult moral choice. Now, we don't often think about courage in ourselves or others unless an apparent heroic deed has been performed that goes well beyond the call of duty. Someone is rescued from a burning building, there's been an accident, a drowning, or a crime of violence. And those who dare to respond courageously are heroes. They inspire us and help to affirm our belief in the nobler side of humanity and its goodness. Those who do not act are normal, or at the extreme cowardly. But there are many kinds of courage, and today in the Bible, God invites you and I to look at the place of courage in our lives. Do not underestimate how much courage you have, and how your courage is a very real way that you live out your faith in Jesus Christ. I think it's pretty safe to say that most of us have some experience with fear. We all have some kind of situation or thought that can instill a feeling of fear in us. And as for me, as I shared last week, that one arduous 8-hour hike barely 2 weeks ago, rock climbing with my daughter in Tobermory's Bruce Trail, both on and off the trail, tested my fear of heights and my own strength and dexterity. I'm also a bit uncomfortable around snakes. And the fact that Elizabeth loves snakes and seeks the rattlesnake trails, and that we met a snake, which she engaged with to prevent it eating a mother bird's eggs, provoked some anxiety and wonder in me as I watched her in careful operation. Now, these are fairly common kinds of fears, and many of us have other fears in common. Some of us fear the future because of all the changes that have happened or are happening in our lives. And some of us fear losing our health and being dependent on others to take care of us. Some of us fear being unable to support ourselves financially, especially in these troubled economic times. Some of us fear losing a loved one and the loneliness that would entail for us. And some of us fear the ultimate unknown, death. In our gospel lesson for today, you may, like me, have been intrigued that Jesus asked the question, "Why are you afraid?" Duh. Some of his disciples are seasoned fishermen, and they know the Sea of Galilee, but this is nothing like they've had before. And in reading about storms, I've read how it is no scientific reason why we should have over 100-foot waves on a lake, but they exist and they happen. Some of his disciples knew that sea, as I said, and the dangers of a storm, but despite their best efforts at keeping the boat afloat, it was sinking. We don't know how far they were from land, but in Mark's version of the story, swimming for shore apparently is not an option. Even experienced fishermen knew that their chances of surviving on the open water under these conditions were not good. So Jesus' question strikes me. It makes me think that perhaps he wasn't just asking the obvious question. In the follow-up, he asks also, "Have you still no faith?" It seems to me that the question Jesus is really asking is about their faith. One of the main themes of the gospel is that despite all that they had witnessed Jesus do and say, despite all that they had discovered him to be, over and over, the disciples lacked faith. And it strikes me, and perhaps you, as ironic, that the very ones who were closest to him struggled just like everybody else to trust in him when they were confronted with something that they didn't understand or that instilled fear in him. Over and over, they seemed all too willing to abandon their faith. When Elizabeth and I were walking deep in the woods in Tobermory, and I'll get these stories eventually out of my system, we knew that bears had been encountered, and that the worst thing, but not likely, that one of the worst things to do if you meet an aggressive bear, you probably know what it is, don't run. As then the bear, because they have poor eyesight, assumes you are food and runs after you to eat. Yet fear would tell you to run. Courage would tell you to back away slowly, waving your arms, making noise, to intimidate what beside you is a giant, sinewy, furry ball of fury. I think the questions Jesus asked of his disciples are worth asking of ourselves. Why are we afraid? There are some things that are simply frightening, and it is only human for us to respond to them with fear. But it's one thing for us to feel fear, and it's another thing for us to live in fear. Too often, we don't just feel fear, we turn it into something that occupies our whole lives and freezes us from doing the very things we desire to do and know are good for us to do. We don't just feel fear, we let it move in and take up residence. We don't just experience fear, we turn it into a giant, Category 5 Goliath storm that sends us running for cover and cowering in bunkers. Now, part of the problem with fear is what it does to us when we give it that much power over our lives. We then cling to whatever it is we fear losing. We hold on for dear life. What we desperately fear to lose, we will sometimes do anything to keep. And in the process, we try to control what we can't control. We try to cling to what we can't hold. And in this situation, Jesus challenges us to hold on to life more lightly, not because it is not precious, not because we do not want to live it fully, but because whatever we cling to has the risk of overwhelming and consuming us. And so we have to look and think about the challenge to look beneath the fear and see the sustaining hand of God, of grace and mercy, even when life's twists and turns are so frightening. And that's something that we have to do day by day, hour by hour, and sometimes even moment by moment. Faith, of course, is not magic that somehow protects us from loss or hardship or catastrophe. Prayer matters and makes a difference. At its root, faith is basic trust. Trust in the God who says, I will never leave or forsake you. It doesn't mean bad things won't ever happen to us. It means that when they do, the one in whom we place our faith keeps us from going under. Now what are following, I'm just going to show you briefly, I know the heat is mounting, is a series of photos of National Ontario Great Lakes storms, just to help you appreciate. Yeah, that's what I want, if you can see that. We're not alone in being caught up in some things that go beyond our control and take a lot of courage. Can you see in this picture a tiny raft? There are 2 survivors on it. Can you imagine? They abandoned a ship, and this was on Lake Erie, and they survived and were rescued. The next slide shows a sudden formation of a water spout, again Lake Erie. I'm trying to make these local to us. Last August during a high water crisis, and many people courageously helped others through the crisis. Here is a massive towering water that batters against a Great Lakes lighthouse. And we're reminded of Jesus' words, be still, be calm. And this lighthouse weathered the storm and still stands to be a beacon to boats and ships finding their way home. Some of you might have heard, maybe not lived through, the Great Lakes hurricanes of 1913. It was a devastating storm, took many lives, and many ships did not make it home. But as they corresponded, it was profound how courageous everyone was on board, and also how faith-filled. And there were amazing acts of bravery that united efforts that led to support of the bereaved and rescue of many people. Now the next 3 photos are where I was, but not in a storm. These are of Tobermory, Georgian Bay, and the grotto. The cliffs range from 30 to 120 feet above lake level. And you can see how severe the storms are, that they are actually reaching up to places where you think nothing could touch you. And again, isn't that life sometimes? We never believe what can touch us. So then one more set is coming up of attracts people to the region is scuba diving. There are over 30 shipwrecks that are clearly visible in the bright blue waters of the lake. It is part of life to at times be overwhelmed by our circumstances, to feel we're sunk before we're sunk, very small against the vast expanse of challenges. Yet God tells us over and over again to focus on what we have at hand. His love and presence, our courage, each other, our faith, and our wits make a difference. So while Jesus sleeping in the boat, which is the next slide, looks as if he is indifferent, on the contrary. He's reminding us he is human, he feels fatigue, and he feels the waves that are closing in on them. The disciples bring their courage to the crisis. As you see in the next slide, they even rage against, in this painting, the storm. But fear is overtaking them. And I added this next one because I want you to look at Jesus. That might not be the usual Jesus, but he's looking very Judaic, as he should, in this picture. But do you look at his face? He sees there is a serious element in nature to contend with. He's not making light of it. We sometimes think he just got up and said, be still. You can see that he's facing the storm and maybe his eternal storms. And then from that place, courage comes to Jesus. And he says the words that just don't roll lightly, but come from profound trust in God and faith. Be still. And so what happens, as you see in the next slide, is that while he is doing this, in this picture, what are the disciples doing? They're still working. They're still giving what they got. And that's a parallel for us as well. In overwhelming situations, Jesus is right beside us. We're to keep doing and focusing on what we can do and trusting God's as well as present. And the next slide just shows that, again, a miracle comes. They're amazed. We're sometimes amazed when things break open that have been so hard for so long for us, but they do. It's a promise that God gives us. And then in the following slide comes peace. Now I only want to take one more minute to go over quickly the first reading really fast with a few strategies. In this story that we have of David and Goliath that follows, we notice that David faced the giants. And what we get from that in facing the giants is that we know that life often puts us in circumstances, we have to keep going through the slides, where we are against the odds. But like David, we can face our giants. Sometimes the giant is a political force, and sometimes, as you'll see in the next slide, which is more like a David and Goliath one, you still need to know what you're facing. So there's like, you know how David had 5 stones? It's like I'm doing really fast, 5 little stones. You still have to know what your storm is. So this little guy, he's ready for it. And the next one as well. I know he just got a little rock. He's mad at all the tanks that have come in and messed up his place, his home. But what he represents is also that beyond him are advocates from afar as well, saying, big injustices, big countries, whatever they are, we can face them. We are bigger than our fears. We are bigger than our fears. And then the next one. Know this about the opponent. They will come. They will come to fight you. They will send their best. They will try to intimidate you. They rarely come alone. They come in all forms. And you better recognize them. That being said, in the next slide, this is the second stone. Size doesn't matter. And sometimes God will put Goliath in your life for you to find the David within you. I think that's really important. Sometimes God will put a Goliath in your life for you to find the David within you. For you to realize, again, that size doesn't matter. In life, we're going to come across big challenges, small challenges, enormous challenges. But the size of the challenge is irrelevant. It doesn't determine what's possible for us. And so you'll see in the next slide that we think bigger than the challenge. And I mentioned that earlier. Everyone thought Goliath was too big and nobody noticed he was a great big target. David did. And finally, the next one shows again David and Goliath. And the fourth stone made use of what we already have. He put on that armor. Wasn't that hilarious? He couldn't walk in it. And Lindsay did that so well. And everyone thought, well, that's more protection. And then sometimes in our crisis, people are saying, do this, do that. Go this way, go that way. And somewhere we have to be still and know what our resources are and trust those resources. And that's what David did. And so he was free and easy to be able to move and to charge and to sling. And so the very last slide has come, the end of my homily. And that is, believe it is all possible. Jesus keeps telling us over and over, the Israelites did not believe it was possible to defeat Goliath, which is why they feared him. On the other hand, David believed, and because he believed, and because he trusted God was with him, things that looked impossible were possible. We are capable, I close by saying, of much more than we believe. We are capable of much more even that our faith would seem to hold, because God holds us. Amen.